Hello, I'm Lisa Gray, Executive Director of the Simsbury Chamber of Commerce. I'm here today with Ferg and Linda Jansen, residents of Simsbury, and we're going to chat about Simsbury's Public Art Trail. In 2018, we were honored to present Simsbury's first public art trail, consisting of sculptures by the artist Seward Johnson at various locations throughout Simsbury. I'm thrilled to announce that the Simsbury Chamber of Commerce will be bringing back the public art trail of sculptures in recognition of Simsbury's 350th anniversary in 2020. The whole project was the brainchild of Ferg and Linda. So why don't you guys tell us about the first time that you encountered Seward Johnson's works and why you thought it would be important to bring it to Simsbury?
We were at a wedding in a little town in Indiana, having lunch in their downtown, and I was looking out the window watching the window washers, and I said to Ferg, I don't think that guy is moving. So after lunch we crossed the street, investigated it, and found a brochure and found out that the window washer was just one of 20 or 25 throughout the town. Mm-hmm. So we walked it. It was a very walkable tour, which it is in Simsbury also, and thought, gee, Simsbury is really laid out for this. This is something we can do. This is so much fun. And people were walking around doing selfies with them. So that's how it all started. Mm-hmm. And then I just kept bugging Ferg that we got to get this together, got to get it together.
Yep.
So it took probably the gestation period was probably at least 6 months, if not longer. And so I talked to Lisa. We had brochures from this little town in Warsaw, Indiana, and we started thinking about it. And then we had a meeting. We got like the power brokers together with Lisa and Martin Geis of Simsbury Bank and people like Mike Gerard and the Rich Zawitsky, all the people who kind of might, because we're dealing with heavy sculptures and the mechanics of putting together. So we had a meeting, and the meeting, we came away from there, got a lot of information, and went back, and Lisa and I went back and met with Martin, and Martin said, I like this, and I'll start it off with a check for $10,000, mm-hmm. and that's how it started. Mm-hmm. So Linda and I, it took a while to figure out, talking to Warsaw, Indiana, how we kind of got in touch with these people, but eventually the person who handles this for Seward Johnson is in Santa Monica, California. So Linda and I flew out and had scheduled a meeting with her. Her name is Paula Stokey, and we're talking about, we're a little town in New England, and we loved it in Warsaw, and we want to bring the sculptures to our town. Do you think that's possible? And so she said, well, I graduated from Simsbury High School, and my mother still lives in Simsbury, and I think it's very possible. So one thing led to another. We started raising money and had a book and started letting people pick sculptures, and lo and behold, after a year and a half of work, really, mm-hmm. And mainly we had all this work created, and we just kind of dumped it on Lisa and said the chamber board approved it, and as long as the goal was, it wasn't a fundraiser. The word very clearly was, you have to break even, mm-hmm. and we did. We made like $300 after all that work in a year, and we created a lot of smiles mm-hmm. and a lot of selfies. So mm-hmm. that was the goal, just to make Simsbury, make it fun in Simsbury. Mm-hmm.
So what was the response like? Share that with everybody.
Well, it was the response was, we went through over 30,000 brochures mm-hmm. at every location, and we, Bill Cox and Paul Berg and Linda and I and you and a bunch of other people, we basically every day were filling the brochure racks, because it was it started May 15th and it was supposed to end September 15th. But we extended it till I think October 30th or something,
yeah.
And just people just kept coming.
Yeah.
Bus loads from retirement communities, people from as far away as New Jersey, Maine, or whatever. It just got a lot of. It was fun to see people walking, and we have one of the few walkable downtowns in Connecticut, and it was really populated. So
yeah,
anyway.
I mean, we had social media all abuzz, and we were receiving notes of commendation and thanks from people all over the country. So it was really something, yes, mm-hmm. and it was something that I was very, very proud to be a part of. And thank you for bringing the idea and for bringing such notoriety to the town of Simsbury, because I think it helped out the businesses a lot. I think they saw a lot more foot traffic in our shops and our restaurants and
Well,
places
thank
like
you.
that,
You had the burden of the work. It was a very, I want this sculpture, it's not available, what's your second choice? And pay us the money, and oh yeah, I didn't know about this, even though Lisa sent out numerous emails, and at the end, we were supposed to have 20 sculptures, and we ended up with 32.
Right,
and
right.
and now Lisa's already in touch with last year's. I think we've got 10 people already who did it last year
about a
that
dozen.
want 2020.
Yeah.
And a lot of them are doing different ones. So it should be interesting, interesting.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
anyway.
So that's the good news, is that any businesses who weren't able to participate last year will be able to participate in 2020. So while we all anxiously await the return of the sculptures in 2020, I thought I would take you on a little tour of the sculptures we had in 2018. First, let me say I do not work for Seward Johnson. All of the information I'm going to share with you was obtained from the curator or the internet. John Seward Johnson II, also known as J. Seward Johnson Jr. and simply Seward Johnson, is an American artist known for his life-size bronze sculptures, which are castings of living people depicting them engaged in day-to-day activities. This piece, titled When Now Becomes Then, is one such casting. Castings from living things result in a very lifelike finished sculpture. Here, the young woman is sketching a picture of the outside of the mill at Millwright's restaurant, which we were able to request from the Seward Johnson atelier. The extremely realistic imagery achieved by the casting and by the painting of the sculpture is the technique called trompe-l'oeil. Referring to this work in particular, Johnson said, "I become emotional when I see people experience great pleasure from having access to art, from being able to touch it, and from being transformed by the responses they have when surrounded by art." Johnson is a grandson of Robert Wood Johnson I, the co-founder of Johnson & Johnson, making him a very wealthy heir to the immense medical products fortune. Johnson was born in New Jersey. His father was John Seward Johnson I, and his mother was Ruth Dill, the sister of actress Diana Dill, making him a first cousin of actor Michael Douglas. At the wedding of the actor and Catherine Zeta-Jones, Michael's father, Kirk, asked Johnson to create a bronze likeness of him. The massive bust now sits in the artist's New Jersey studio. Johnson not only produces art, but also generously supports cultural projects. He is the chairman and CEO of the Atlantic Foundation, created by his father, John Seward Johnson I, in 1963. Johnson created the Johnson Atelier Technical Institute of Sculpture, an educational nonprofit casting and fabrication facility, in 1974 as a means of fostering young sculptors' talents while creating a foundry designed to construct his statues that is so well equipped and staffed that it is chosen by many renowned sculptors. The Johnson Atelier now operates as a division of the Sculpture Foundation, and Johnson continues to make his sculpture at the facility, but casting is often performed off-premises, with some of his larger works being cast in China. Johnson laughs frequently and delights in the gently off-color. His longtime curator, Paula Stokey, a native of Simsbury and graduate of Simsbury High School, as Ferg Jansen shared with you earlier, had this to say about this piece, titled Relish 2. Seward Johnson has a way of integrating his humor and integrating the slyness of his intellect into his sculptures in a clever way. He has always tried to bring a lightness and conviviality forward in his works. Unlike much public art, Johnson's work is not heroic. No larger-than-life forebears on pedestals or pigeon-decorated generals on horses for him. Instead, he brings sculpture down to ground level, where he celebrates the simplest human acts and attitudes. His figures nap on park benches, ride skateboards, bop to boom boxes, or simply walk their dog, like this piece entitled Ambassador of the Streets. Johnson says of this piece, "To me, public art is the truest measure of a culture. It is the art that penetrates the living fabric of a culture's life. I also like to think that my work, being a realistic rendition of humanity itself, gives a broad response reference. I enjoy adding interactive elements in my work, which engage members of the public in an intimate way." Mainline art critics have not been kind to Mr. Johnson, whom many see as a rich guy who bought his way into the club. Kitsch, Hallmark, and Norman Rockwell are barbs frequently hurled by those who feel that art should be cool, collected, and at arm's length. Johnson's work is chocolate box rubbish, said the art critic and author Robert Hughes. It has no imaginative component that I can see, and apparently appears to dull corporate minds like his own, the sort of people who run American motels and malls. Over the last 2 decades, however, the art scene has become more comfortable with realism in general, and with Mr. Johnson in particular. Skateboarder is an example of what Johnson refers to as his street work. In my street work, I'm trying to show the joy of being. I like to have discovery in my work, and it's generally done with humor. People playing cards, people throwing a frisbee, or people sitting at a table. It's social art. It's socially responsible art, and socially responsive. As a child, Seward Johnson seemed unlikely to ever make his mark, much less make a work of art. Seward Sr., who ran the family business with his brother Robert Wood Johnson, was, by most accounts, a distant and often absent father. In 1932, just weeks after the Charles Lindbergh baby was kidnapped in nearby Hopewell, an intruder tried to break into the nursery at Maryword, the Johnson family's New Brunswick mansion. A nurse who cared for Mr. Johnson's baby sister Diana heard a noise and called Seward Sr. "My father shot the man in the leg and he fell off his ladder," Johnson said. "He was arrested later, but my father became obsessed with security." His mother, Ruth, the first of Seward Sr.'s 3 wives, and the children were moved around, he said, just to keep us safe. We lived in London and Paris, in Bermuda, and we even stayed with Georgia O'Keeffe in Santa Fe. Seward Johnson's second series, the popular Beyond the Frame group, is inspired by Impressionist and Post-Impressionist masterworks. This series made its debut at the Corcoran Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., and it continues to travel to museum venues across the country. These finely detailed vignettes allow visitors to step into the painting and stroll amid the life-scale bronze figures, becoming part of the scene. This sculpture, entitled La Promenade, is inspired by a painting by Gustave Caillebotte called Paris Street Rainy Day from 1877. In the painting, the wide boulevards slick with rain could be nowhere else but Paris. They are as French as the angled facades of the grand apartment buildings and the fashionable, nonchalant couple strolling in the rain. But it is important to remember that the Paris in Johnson's tableau and Caillebotte's painting is modern. When the Frenchmen painted the wide streets and handsome buildings, they were brand new, the product of Baron Haussmann's redevelopment of Paris. This enormous project, undertaken during the Second Empire of Napoleon III from 1852 to 1870, drastically changed much of the physical aspect of Paris, destroying old winding streets and neighborhoods to bring better circulation, electricity, and a proper sewage system to the rapidly expanding city. This venture also altered social relationships. The wide boulevards provided places to see and be seen, not only in a carriage or on a sidewalk, but also in the cafes, shops, restaurants, and other establishments that have prospered on the ground floor of the new apartment buildings. Johnson discovered Caillebotte had manipulated the usual modes of perspective to create his wide-angled vision of the scene. Johnson was also astounded to find that, as he worked on the large foreground figures, visitors to his studio were so familiar with the painting that they recognized the handsome couple at once, even from behind. And though, with Johnson's help, we can now follow this impressive pair down the street, we will never know what they were thinking or what they saw on the drizzly gray day. For college prep, Johnson was sent to the Foreman School in Litchfield, Connecticut. It was a place for dyslexics, although we weren't called that in those days, Mr. Johnson said. I got kicked out at one point because I just couldn't pay attention, and I was eventually sent back, and then I used all my energy to wreck the place. But I did manage to graduate valedictorian of my class of 3. After a few rowdy years at the University of Maine, where he majored in poultry husbandry, it was the only thing they'd let me into, Johnson said, Johnson enlisted in the Navy. He served for 4 years, partly aboard the frigate USS Gloucester, the only ship hit by enemy fire during the Korean War. Perhaps remembering that time in his life, Johnson created this work, Embracing Peace, based on a photograph taken by Alfred Eisenstadt in 1945 VJ Day in Times Square. Well known for recreating life in our times in vividly realistic bronze, Johnson steps back into history with this work to pay homage to the veterans of World War II. The piece was inspired by that celebratory moment when World War II ended, concluding almost 7 years of wartime. It is also reflective of the spontaneous joy becoming an iconic symbol of this time. Like the original photo, this sculpture has not been without controversy. While on view outside the Cain Memorial Museum in France, French feminist group Osez le Féminisme, Dare to be Feminist, started a petition to remove the statue because it actually depicted a sexual assault rather than a romantic embrace. The debate on whether these claims are true or not started in 2012, when the pair shown in the famous photo was reunited on a CBS News segment. During the show, the woman in the photo, Greta Zimmer Friedman, said that she couldn't do anything when the man, George Mendonza, who was not her boyfriend, nor did she know him at all, grabbed and kissed her after celebrating the end of the war with a few drinks. Still, the fact remains that the photograph represents the symbol of a historic moment, and this kissing sailor sculpture is a fine tribute to the iconic work. With no formal training in art, Johnson took classes at the Cambridge Adult Education Center. His first work was a stylized nude, stainless girl, which came in first in a U.S. steel art competition against 7,000 entries. "I haven't won anything since," Johnson says with a laugh. The intense and internal spirit of the musician is shown in this sculpture entitled Sidewalk Concert. One humorous note is that the paper money in this street player's case are bronze bills with Seward Johnson's own face sculpted in relief on them. In this piece, God Bless America, Seward Johnson brings to life one of the most famous paintings in American history. Painted in 1930, American Gothic was Grant Wood's celebration of the moral virtue of hardworking Americans. The presence in Johnson's series called Icons Revisited reflects this magnetic attraction we have for the image and asks the viewer to examine what facets of this pair have created such broad appeal. Additionally, the question presented by Seward Johnson is, has there been a change in perspective since this iconic painting was made? And what are the shifts that have occurred? What do you think? This work, titled Monet, Our Visiting Artist, depicts a sculpted, full-figured portrait of the beloved painter Claude Monet. The bronze figure has since been shown painting Monet-inspired bronze sculptures created by Seward Johnson as a playful art imitating life scenario. Here he captures this beautiful scene in the Simsbury Historical Society. This remarkable take on the famous Rosie the Riveter image, which honored the women working in the factories on the home front during World War II, is called Can Do. There is now an annual Rosie Day where people dress in the iconic kerchief, red lipstick, and jumpsuit to pay homage to the women who made such a difference in the efforts to supply needed equipment for the troops. This sculpture, Return Visit, was originally created by Seward Johnson for placement in the famous Gettysburg Plaza in Pennsylvania. There, where the first casting of this sculpture is still on view, Lincoln gestures with his hat toward the window where he sat writing the Gettysburg Address. Sculptor Johnson includes a contemporary man to bring the point forward that the speech Lincoln wrote then is still valid and current today. People ask or guess the identity of the modern man, but truly the man who posed for this sculpture was just a local New Jersey man. Some say he resembles Perry Como or George Bush. I've even heard Steve Carell. The artist's intention, however, is that he represent all of us and every man. So in 1955, Johnson took a management position in the family firm, but his imagination increasingly got the better of his business sense. His worst problem, though, was romantic. He wanted to wed Barbara Klein, a mysterious European who had been married and divorced 3 times. My Uncle Robert thought she was a gold digger and had her and her family investigated, Johnson has said. He told me not to marry her, and I told him where he could stick his job, but boy was he ever right. He learned that the hard way. By the early 1960s, the marriage was crumbling. Barbara, her husband later charged in court papers, was intimate with at least 2 other men, both of whom lived in his home. At that point, Mr. Johnson hired private detectives to raid his own home in the middle of the night, hoping to catch Barbara in a compromising position. Mr. Johnson, who was sleeping alone, thought intruders were in the house, did the Johnsonist thing, and shot and injured one of the detectives. The couple divorced in 1964. Soon after, Mr. Johnson married Joyce Horton, a novelist doing graduate work at Johns Hopkins University. The couple have 2 grown children, Seward III, a computer artist, and Clelia, a New York-based actress who goes by the stage name India Blake. Seward Johnson says, "I think that becoming a father has profoundly affected my work. It has softened me and made me more aware of the innermost parts of people." His fondness for children is evident in much of his work, including this piece entitled Attic Trophy. While Johnson's craft, reputation, and now marriage flourished, a tortuous family drama drew him into the headlines. When Seward Sr. died in 1983, he left nearly all of his $400 million fortune to his third wife, Barbara, known as Basia, a Polish immigrant 42 years his junior. Mr. Johnson and his 5 siblings claimed that Basia, who had previously been Seward Sr.'s maid, coerced her failing 86-year-old husband into leaving all his wealth to her. The children had all long been multimillionaires thanks to trusts set up for all Johnson family members, but Basia inheriting a fortune, they said, was an embarrassment. The will contest was one of the largest and costliest in American history, and one of the ugliest. After 3 years of mudslinging, during which regiments of lawyers billed around $25 million, the children were awarded $6 million each, with Mr. Johnson getting an extra $7 million as the trustee of his father's Florida-based Harbor Branch Oceanographic Center. Basia kept the rest, including Jasna Polana, the Garris Mansion she had built in Princeton. She turned it into a country club in 1996. This piece, Nice to See You, was conceived by Johnson as a challenge to create a figure viewed from back, sides, and the front through glass. The window creates another type of artistic framing that interested him. It also takes the viewer a little bit longer to recognize a non-human presence when they approach this figure from the glass side. The double take is even more pronounced as people become suddenly aware that the face greeting them is not another live person. Note that another expression of Johnson's natural humor is shown in the inclusion of a paperback book in the washer's back pocket. The title is Rear Window, a nod to the very frightening and popular classic Alfred Hitchcock movie. Mr. Johnson controls the entire production process of each of his works, a rarity in sculpture. The 50,000 square foot Seward Johnson Atelier in New Jersey is considered the finest place in America to cast bronze. The nonprofit Atelier employs over 100 people, some of them apprentices in training. Its foundry employs the ancient, complex, lost wax process of casting, which picks up the finest detail of the work. The center also contains painting and drying rooms, and even a computer-guided laser that can create 3-dimensional works from 2-dimensional drawings. Of this piece, called Special Delivery, the artist says, "As you're examining all of the details and you go up to look at his face, you're abruptly taken aback because all of a sudden there's someone looking back at you and you are caught." Johnson's sly sense of humor is again evident in this work as you look closely and notice that the postman is delivering a letter from the IRS, addressed to Seward Johnson. Mr. Johnson's bronzes, which can take up to 2 years to complete, are not cast by applying plaster to living people as some sculptors do. The works are first molded as plasticine figures about 12 inches tall. When he has the pose and placement that he wants, he then brings in live models so that he can work the fine details of face and hands and even clothing into the clay. Next, apprentices duplicate the small model in a life-size version. A seamstress then stitches clothing to a plaster cast of the form so that folds and wrinkles will fall correctly during casting. Sometimes air must be injected to get a shirt to blouse correctly. The form is sprayed with a resin to stiffen the fabric before the casting process begins. The painstaking detail is indisputable in this work entitled There, Now You Can Grow. A lifelong painter, Johnson says paintings often celebrate very common and everyday pleasures and ways people find themselves. This relates to my work, as I am also saying, stop and think, hey, that's worth celebrating, that's worth commemorating in a sculpture. Johnson's process is so fine that it can catch the pattern of a herringbone jacket and the cracks from an old briefcase. After casting, Mr. Johnson's assistants color the figures with a polychrome patina of paints developed by chemists just for the atelier. It is no wonder that each original figure costs approximately $46,000 to complete. In this piece, aptly titled The Gardener, the man kneels to put in some colorful plantings. He has traveled around the world doing just this in Rome, Milan, Sardinia, Sicily, Lisbon, Madrid, Hanover, and Sydney. The flowers he is planting here were given by the volunteers of the old Drake Hill Flower Bridge. Near the atelier in Hamilton Township is Johnson's ever-growing labor of love. Since 1992, he has sunk tens of millions of dollars into the 22-acre Grounds for Sculpture, a bucolic setting designed to make art more accessible to the public. On the site of the former New Jersey State Fairgrounds, over 150 sculptures, many of them abstract, by various artists, are placed among meadows, woodlands, and ponds. This sculpture, called Creating, shows a man sketching, perhaps an architect or an engineer. Seward Johnson always wants to encourage people to find their creativity in the out of doors, even the creative inspiration that you need for your job. Seward is the artist that everybody loves to hate, said the one-time director of Washington, D.C.'s Corcoran Gallery, David Levy. But quietly and selflessly, he is an enormously important citizen of art. He's above and beyond patronage. The atelier and Grounds for Sculpture are grand contributions. In this work, entitled Grabbing Some Peace, this woman has gone for a walk and decides to put her phone aside while she naps on the lawn of the Simsbury 1820 house. She's both connected and disconnected in all the best ways. In this final piece that we'll see on our tour today, My World depicts a little girl engrossed in a picture book. The piece was created in 1992 specifically for a library location. It shows the delight that even pre-readers have with the world of books and literature. A little girl named Sarah posed for this sculpture when she was in second grade. At that time, she was very proud to be the only second grader with a job. Now Sarah has graduated from college. She is still proud to know that the sculpture of her continues to travel the world and be enjoyed by many people. A casting of this sculpture is in Malibu, California, and was a guest at Michael Jackson's Neverland Ranch. This concludes our art trail tour today. I hope you all enjoyed yourselves and got to learn a little bit more about the artist Seward Johnson and some of his sculptures. Donations to support the 2020 project will be gratefully accepted. If you are so inclined, donations may be mailed to the Simsbury Chamber of Commerce, P.O. Box 224, Simsbury, Connecticut 06070, or you may call 860-651-7307. Thank you so much for joining me on this art tour.
That's adorable.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.